Welcome to Second Baptist Church. My name is Kevin Pranado, and I am so happy to be here. I'm the Associate Pastor of Social Work, and we are so glad you are joining us for worship here in downtown Little Rock and online through Facebook and YouTube. If you are visiting us here in person, we'd ask that you fill out the guest information card in the pew in front of you and drop it in the plate next to the door on your way out this morning. We'd simply like to have a record of your visit. Someone from our staff will drop you an email or text to let you know that we enjoyed having you with us. If you are visiting online, find a link below in the comments that will direct you to our online visitors card. We'd love to know you worshiped with us today. Casey Eller is going to come up for a quick announcement about VBS.
Hello, I'm jumping up here too. I'm Jessie Daniel, our preschool minister. So we have something very important happening this upcoming week. You've probably heard about it. It's called VBS. And if you will please look at your bulletin on the inside page. There are 2 QR codes. Everyone with me? So we need to know who is coming. This is very important because we are ordering t-shirts for everyone, and we want to make sure that we have enough and have the correct sizes. So if you plan on having a kiddo come join, or if you have friends that are thinking about coming, please share the information and have them sign up by today. So what you'll do is take your camera, you're going to scan the QR code, it'll take you to a link, and then you can just fill out the form. It's really quick and easy. Just select the dates that you will be participating so that we know who all is coming and we have enough t-shirts and volunteers. So please, please, please tell your friends and your family and have them do so by today so that we are prepared and ready to go for next week.
Speaking of our volunteers, thanks to everyone who has volunteered to help us out with VBS. We're going to have a brief informational meeting on the 3rd floor immediately after worship. So after worship, if you'll just make your way up to the 3rd floor. I'm going to speak just for a second about our service project. Last year, we collected over 100 toys for the Dorcas House and for Family Promise of Pulaski County. And I am very proud to say I took about 15 pies to the face last year in an effort to get those numbers up. I'm even prouder to say I'm not doing that this year. However, we are collecting food for the Arkansas Food Bank. That's this year's service project. So to all the kids in the room, we're going to start collecting next Sunday, our first Sunday of VBS. So go ahead and start bringing those things. We'll put it on the 2BCLR Facebook page exactly what we need. And this year, you get to, it's a secret, but it's good, y'all. So we will see you next week at VBS. Thank you so much.
Again, we welcome you to Second Baptist Church. As we enter into our time of worship this morning, hear these words from 1 Kings. Afterwards, we are going to pause with a moment of silence for reflection. 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 8 through 12. He got up and ate and drank. Then he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence.
morning, church. Will you please stand as we sing together? Come away from rush and hurry to the stillness of God's peace. From our vain ambitions worry, come to Christ to find release. From our
Good morning, church. It's good to be back with you. I missed y'all last week so very much. We have a lot to pray over this morning. Our youth left at 6:30-ish this morning. 18 youth, 4 sponsors headed to Middlesboro, Kentucky. So they will be in a van with not a spare seat inside for the best part of the day. Keep them in your prayers as they travel. They will be doing good work all week long and hope to come back Friday, hopefully before the sun goes down. Also, we have more people in the life of our church with COVID at this moment than at any point in the entire pandemic. And of course, we're at a place where most all of us are vaccinated, thanks be to God, and that keeps symptoms relatively mild. But I can testify that it's still no joke and something that we need to be very careful about. Not just for you, but for the person next to you. So our recommendation today and over the weeks to come is that we mask up when we're in this room to protect each other and to use the wisdom God gave us. But also we have a good sum of people this morning who are out because of COVID, who need our prayer. So be smart yourself, check in on each other, and I want to thank you for all the cards and well wishes and prayers this last week. It meant a lot to us. With all that said, we're going to pray a little differently today. In today's scripture reading, Elijah is out on the run. He's out in the wilderness, and he hears God speak in the silence. Given that fact, it seemed like the way we should pray today is in silence. We started worship this way, and I'm going to call you to that same place once more. May I invite you today not to pray with your mouth and voice, but with your ears? If prayer is a conversation, then surely we should spend as much time listening as we do talking. In our summer of soul care, might I invite you to still, not just your voice, but still your life today. And get to the deepest place you can go and meet God there. Enjoy the silence. You need it. I need it. Can I invite you to do some active listening? Listen to what God has been saying to you. Listen to what God is trying to say to you. And might I invite you just to rest? I'm not unconvinced today that the most liberating and redemptive thing we could do in this room is rest from the noise. So can we, after the prophet Elijah today, go out into the wilderness and just listen? Because it might be in the silence that we hear the voice of God actually speak to us. Would you join me in the quiet? Rest, people of God. It is a gift of God. So rest in the quiet. Feel the strength return to your body, your mind, and your soul. And if it makes you uncomfortable, probe that too. Speak, O Lord, for your servants are listening. And don't just listen, people of God, hear. Hear that the silence isn't empty, but full. Whoever has ears to hear. And in the silence, God asked Elijah, "What are you doing here?" I wonder how you might answer that question in this moment, in this place. What are you doing here?
In the quiet, Lord, I come, been invited by your Son. In the stillness I can hear Jesus calling me near. Come to me, all you weary and worn. Come, all you heavy hearted, my beloved child, come away for a while, and you shall find rest for your soul. You shall find rest for your soul. Those refreshing, gentle words feel like water for my thirst. With a whisper in my ear, Jesus bids me draw near. Come to me, all you weary you shall find rest for your soul. You shall find rest for your soul. You shall find rest for your soul. You shall find rest for your soul.
Good morning. My name is Allison Hiblong, and out of the 10 years I've been going here, this is only my second time up here, so please bear with me as I am nervous. It is so funny how God works with us. I did not know what the verses would be today. I did not know what the message would be, but somehow He has made this work. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight. Amen. I know that many of us have heard the word self-care. Take care of our mental and physical health. Especially during the pandemic, we all heard about how to take care of ourselves. One new ritual that I have been doing as part of my self-care that has turned into soul care is 10 minutes of quiet. My counselor encouraged me to seek out 10 to 15 minutes a day to find quiet. I settled for 10 because 15 seemed like a stretch. And I felt ridiculous at first and did it to show that it wouldn't help. I sit. I am not being productive. Well, now after a couple of months of this, I yearn for those 10 minutes a day. I sit on my back porch. I listen to the birds, the different notes and calls. I watch the leaves of the trees dance in the wind and rain. I feel the sunshine and breeze on my body. I do not take in any new information. And as we know, the last few months, there's been a lot of new information in our world. I can just sit with myself, nature, and God. I think this is a real-life example of the fruitfulness that Andy presented us with a few weeks ago. After this time alone, my mind has time to slow down, and I actually, in many cases, become more productive because I am more focused and things are less hectic. When life is chaotic and unsteady, God moments have grounded me. I have found moments in my life that I feel like God is saying, I see you and I know you. Some of these moments are as simple as seeing a sticker of my favorite Disney character on the street while I'm running an errand for work, or a cool breeze on my first day at a new job, or snow anytime. So that 12 inches of snow last year came right after my birthday. You're welcome. The ice is not me, though, okay? And my first and funniest God moment was slipping in a crowded cafeteria, catching myself and nothing on my tray spilling, and no one saw it. But God saw it. These might not seem like soul care because I'm not doing anything to take care of my soul. I am being. I am noticing God who is noticing me. Isn't that the relationship we want to know and to love? I hope you find your God moments. And just to ease your worries, I can go years without one of these moments. Or I don't notice it as a God moment at first, but later on with more perspective. I will leave you with this last God moment. I was living alone in Washington, D.C. I was having a hard time being in a new city with new roommates and with a new job, and no one or anything familiar around me. As I walked the National Mall, I heard a musician playing a trumpet. I reached the musician with no intent on stopping until he changed his song. He began to play a song that the UCA band played at the end of every football game. After 3 years in this band, I knew this song well. As I was missing my friends back home and not knowing why I decided to spend a semester away from everything I knew and loved, this musician played "Precious Lord, Take My Hand." Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Thank you.
Come to me, all you weary and worn. Come, all you heavy-hearted. My beloved child, come away for a while, and you shall find rest for your soul. You shall find rest for your soul.
Church, will you please stand and sing with us?
Are you thirsty? Are you empty? Come and drink these living waters. Tired and broken, peace unspoken, rest beside these living waters. Christ is calling, find refreshing at the cross of living waters. Lay your life down, all the old gone, rise up in these living waters. There's a river that flows living waters. Love, forgiveness, vast and boundless. Christ, He is our living water. There's a river that flows with mercy and love, bringing joy to the city of our God. There our hope is secure, do not fear anymore. Praise the Lord of living waters. There our hope is secure, do not fear anymore. Praise the Lord of living waters.
Amen. Please be seated.
He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram. Also, you shall anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. And you shall anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, at Abel Maholah, as prophet in your place. Whoever escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu will or shall kill, and whoever escapes from the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall kill. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks, Christy. And thanks to Allison for her word today, noticing the God who notices you. That's good stuff right there, y'all. And she sang right in front of Suzanne and all. She's in the choir now. You know that. You sang in front of Suzanne. Elijah was no C- prophet. He was the best of the best of the best of prophets. Like the top one. You might remember that when Jesus ascended the Mount of Transfiguration, when he made it to the top, there was Moses, the great lawgiver, and Elijah, the great prophet. When Israel thought of prophets, they thought of Elijah. You might remember that John the Baptist dressed like Elijah and wanted to be like him when he grew up. You might remember that Jesus cried out for help from the cross. And when he did so, people said, "Is he calling Elijah?" that was centuries after Elijah had died, but he left his mark on Israel as the paradigm of what it meant to be a prophet. And not only was he the best of the best of the best of prophets, but in our text for today, he had just reached the summit of his professional prophetic career. His most obvious prophetic victory. He had just reached the heights of holiness. We're reading today from 1 Kings 19. But in 1 Kings 18, Elijah confronts King Ahab and Queen Jezebel and the 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. It was the rumble on Mount Carmel. Maybe that's what God's prophets primarily do. They speak truth to people in power to be sure that that power is expressed justly and fairly and rightly. And they name the idols of the people. And it was this full-blown prophetic showdown that we read about in the chapter just before this. Elijah in one corner and 450 prophets of Baal in the other corner. This is better than Rocky and the Russian in Rocky IV. Elijah said, let's do this. You build an altar, you prophets of Baal, and kill an ox and put it on top of that altar and offer it as a sacrifice, and I will do the same. I will build an altar, sacrifice an ox on top of that altar, and we will each call upon the name of our God, and we will see what happens. The prophets of Baal did so and called on their God to no avail. Call again, Elijah said to them. Maybe your God was on vacation or has gone to the bathroom or is taking a nap, something like that. There is no trash talking like religious trash talking, by the way. And if you don't believe me, church softball leagues, y'all should go sometime. They called again and nothing. Meanwhile, Elijah had servants pour water upon the ox and his altar, and a trench was cut around the altar so that it filled with water. And Elijah called upon the name of the Lord, and fire fell from heaven and consumed the sacrifice and turned the altar to dust and lapped up the water that was in the trench. And all the people cried out, Yahweh is God. Which, by the way, is Elijah's name. It's what Elijah's name means. Eli, my God, and Yah, short for Yahweh. My Yahweh is my God. And the people rose up and killed the prophets of Baal. It was Elijah's best crowning moment as prophet of Israel. This is what put him in the Hall of Fame, y'all. And then word trickled back to Queen Jezebel, who then sent word to Elijah and said, what happened to my prophets will soon happen to you. In other words, I'm going to kill you. And so the greatest prophet in Israel's history, in 1 Kings 18, on the greatest day of his life, at least professionally, now found himself running for his life. Now he was a fugitive prophet. He ran into the wilderness for a day, and he sat down under a tree and he prayed to die. This is the next chapter, y'all. He prayed to die. Church family, might I suggest to you today that the distance from the best day of your life to the worst day of your life may not be as far as you think. Might I suggest to you today that the distance between religious taunting and religious cries for help may not be as far as you think. And might I suggest to you today that even a day's journey into the wilderness of life can do a number on even an ounce of pride that lives in you. But under that tree, Elijah took a nap. And the text says angels touched him while he napped. And then they cooked lunch for him. By the way, you'd be amazed at what a nap and a meal can do for you. I think that's usually how the angels do touch us. We take naps and we eat meals. So go home, eat lunch, and take a nap and feel the touch of angels upon you. But that meal was to sustain him for a further journey. Elijah, the fugitive prophet, now traveled 40 days into the wilderness to Mount Horeb, which is the same as Mount Sinai. It's just a different name for it. Horeb means wasteland, so it's emphasizing the wilderness part of his journey here. Elijah in chapter 18 is on Mount Carmel experiencing grand victory. And in chapter 19, he's on Mount Horeb. But even though he's on a mountain, he's in the pit. The great prophet of Israel's history, who up to this point had been driven by the promises of God, was now driven by the threats of a queen. The text says that Elijah came to a cave. But that's not literally what it says in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it says he came to the cave. Remember, this is Sinai. Is this the same place that Moses hid under the cleft of a rock while the presence of God passed by near him? Is this the same place? We don't know, but is it the same place? What are you doing here, Elijah? The Lord asked. And Elijah told God the story, but he didn't really tell God the answer. And then God passed by, just like God did with Moses, in that very spot, maybe. Except not at all like God did with Moses in that very spot. There was a strong wind. It nearly tore the mountain apart, the text says, but God wasn't in that. Then an earthquake, but God wasn't in that. And then a fire. Y'all, these are the ways that God spoke to Moses. Do you remember that? These are the ways that God revealed God's self to Moses. But this is not how God reveals himself here. And then the text says there was a gentle blowing or a quiet whisper, your translation may say. And God was in the whisper. I gripe at God all the time about this. It gets on my last nerve that our God whispers. I want God to shout. Because if God would shout, then everybody in the world could hear it, whether they wanted to hear it or not. It would make my job a lot easier. I could just point to the one shouting and say, "Did you hear that?" I wish God shouted so the whole world would hear. When you whisper, people have to lean in. When you whisper, not everyone hears. When you whisper, it's almost like it's not for the whole world. It's for whoever has ears to hear kind of business. You have to lean in to a whisper. I want God to shout. But more times than not, y'all, our God is a whispering God. And if I can't come to terms with that, and if you can't come to terms with that, then we will probably miss out on a lot of what God has to say to us. Not in the earthquake, not in the wind, not in the fire. God was in the still small voice. Or more specifically in Hebrew, it says, Kol Dama Daka, which is literally translated a fine silence or a sheer silence. It's not even a whisper, it's silence. How about that for irony, for paradox? When God does speak, it's in that moment where there is no sound. Doesn't that sound just like God to you? God speaks in the silence. And then asks Elijah the same question. What are you doing here, Elijah? And he responds with the same answer. Read it for yourself. It's word for word the same. Indicating that while Elijah has heard the silence of God, he's unchanged. Elijah can no longer hear God in the silence. And then God begins to retire Elijah. Did you hear that in the story? There's everything here except a 401k. Everything that God says to Elijah after this point is a succession plan. God tells Elijah who to anoint, so there's a political king on the throne in two different cases, Israel and Judah. And then God tells Elijah to anoint Elisha to continue the prophetic role because Elijah is now retiring. It seems that once a prophet's ears no longer work, their tongue is no longer needed. That when the prophet can't hear the word of the Lord anymore, they have no business going around saying the word of the Lord. When the prophet can't hear the deep, voluminous silence of God, then God doesn't want them going around saying much of anything anymore. Even Elijah. The prophetic speech that thunders at thrones and loosens the chains of injustice and rattles the foundations of the status quo begins in the silence of God and God alone. As Rumi, the great Sufi poet, once wrote, silence is the language of God and everything else is a poor translation. Silence is the language of God and everything else is a poor translation. Out away from the idols and the kings and the queens, out in the wilderness, away from the talk and the chatter and the threats and the opinions and the commentary, out away from the loud winds and earthquakes and fires, is the silence of God, which has so very much to say to us. I don't think that anyone has taught me as much about the silence of God as Thomas Merton, an old Trappist monk in Kentucky. Merton once wrote that it's not our speaking that usually breaks a silence, it's our anxiety. We don't break silence because we have something to say. We break silence because the silence scares the hell out of us, if we're honest. We're afraid of the silence because it sends us to the deep, cavernous places within, the wilderness places. And so we keep talking to avoid saying anything. We keep the world noisy because we don't want to go there. He says that silence is the mother of speech. That spending time in the great quiet of God is precisely that point that gives rise to saying things that are worth saying or saying things that are worth hearing. And he says that you and I should think of our lives like music. He says that in music, the silences between the notes are just as much a part of the music as the notes themselves. Have you ever thought about that? That the quiet between the notes is just as much a part of the music as the notes themselves? In fact, if you take the quiet out between the notes, you just have a steady stream of sound that feels chaotic, and the word for that is not music, but noise. I wonder what your life would sound like if you took the silences out. That's how rhythm works, by the way. You don't have rhythm without silence. In the same way, when we don't make room for silence in our lives, then our lives just become perpetual sound and irritating noise in a cultural stream that has enough perpetual sound and irritating noise, but precious little music. We need the silence, y'all. Can I tell you, pastor to people today, you need the silence. And I need the silence, especially as someone who talks a lot. God speaks in the silence. The silence is what makes music of the noise. And if the great Elijah, fresh off his best day of prophetic ministry, needed silence, We probably need it today as well. Y'all, the world is desperate for more prophets and more prophetic communities today. The world needs prophets today. By and large, the church has abandoned its public role to speak truth to those in power and to name idols. We don't do that much today. Some churches have said that's not even our rightful real estate. And yet the world needs the church to be a voice of reason in the public arena, to hold powers accountable, to ensure that power is used in the ways that it's supposed to be used and doesn't trample on the very people God made. And the world needs the church to name our idols, lest we trust in the wrong things that lead us down the wrong paths to dead ends. The world needs prophetic voices and prophetic communities, and many of you are in this room today precisely for that reason. That second has been that to some degree, and we're becoming that to some degree. May it be so. But hear me, church family, church of prophets today. In a world of so much volume, our voice only really matters if it adds to the quality of the discussion, not just the quantity of it. There's enough words in the world. There aren't enough true ones, like really true ones. And that will only happen if we stay rooted in the voluminous silence of God. If we start there. If we're shaped more by the Psalms than Twitter. If we're shaped more by the experience of God than the commentary of pundits. If we're shaped more by the voice of God than the threats of kings and queens. It will only happen. We will only do it well and for long and be standing at the end of it if we start in the silence. The prophetic voice of this church cannot say anything more than what our prophetic ears have heard. And before we listen to all the chatter, we must be willing to explore the voluminous silence of God, even if it starts in the deepest parts of who you and I are. Before the world will hear the best of our voice, God will get the best of our ears. Because unchanged people cannot change the world. Before we ever speak of oughts and shoulds and coulds, let's be sure that we've spent some time in the great is of God. I'm not sure there's a whole lot of redemption in the words oughts and should and could. How do you feel when somebody starts saying to you ought and should and could? Even if they're right, I don't like it. But the gospel of Jesus Christ isn't about ought and could and should. The gospel of Jesus Christ is about is. Out of which falls all the shoulds and coulds and mights. Before we march and flip tables and post online and organize publicly, let's be sure, church family, that we've spent enough time in the quiet to know what we're doing and why we're doing it. And before we offer directives to the world out there, let's be sure we're not unacquainted and utter strangers to the world in here. Y'all, there's a world out there calling for some words of truth and justice and love. So let's go speak it. But just don't forget, y'all, that silence is the mother of speech. That God's language is silence. And everything else, even this sermon, is a poor translation. And don't forget that the silence between the notes is part of the music too. The silence between the notes is part of the music too. And all the prophets said, "Oh Lord, when we're busy, it feels like we're doing something. And when we're loud, it feels like we're saying something. And when we're marching, it feels like we're calling attention to something. But just because it feels like we're doing something, it doesn't exactly mean that we're doing something. And just because it feels like we're saying something, it doesn't mean we're saying the something we think we're saying. And just because it feels like we're calling attention to something, doesn't mean we're calling attention to the thing we think we're calling attention to. So today, in this moment, and at the beginning of all of our work as a church, O Lord, ground us in that deep silence. Exercise our 2 ears before we start exercising our 1 mouth. And help us never lose sight of who you are. Help us never lose hearing to that voice that speaks most clearly in the silence. So today in this worship service, O Lord, prepare us to be the church in the world. And give us ears to hear all that there is to hear in the silence. We pray this in the name of Jesus, who is the Word, and who also got a way to listen. Amen. In a moment, we're going to stand and sing, and I'm going to invite you to respond, to rest once again as you sing. And if you need prayer from a friend today, I'm here to receive you and to pray over you. However you feel led to respond, I invite you to do so today. Would you stand with me and sing with me?
Speak, O Lord, as we come to you to receive the fruit of your holy word. Take your truth, let it deepen us, shape and fashion us in your likeness, that the light of Christ might be seen today in our acts of love and our deeds of faith. Speak, O Lord, and fulfill in us all your purposes for your glory. Teach us, Lord, full obedience, holy reverence, true humility, truth is unchanged from the dawn of time that will echo down through eternity. As our grace will stand on your promises, and by faith we'll walk as you walk with us. Speak, O Lord, till your church is built and the earth is filled with your glory.
Don't forget to pray for our youth this week, specifically today and Friday as they travel and do work in between those days. We have a glorious group who left us today, so pray peace over them. Next Sunday we have VBS. If you've yet to sign up, you heard the promises and the threats this morning already. So sign up. Would love to have whatever children in our midst and in your neighborhood and in your family and extended family join us in the next couple of weeks as we participate in VBS. Kevin, can you come stand next to me? Surprise. Kevin officially began this week, and this is his first official Sunday. By the way, think about this. Kevin's first day at work, I said, look, I have COVID, I'm not coming in. Suzanne's got COVID, she's not coming in. Chris is on sabbatical. Kevin was just about running the place his first week on the job. It would have run a lot better. Kevin, we have a welcome basket for you on behalf of our HR committee. I see all things Arkansas in here: salsa, barbecue sauce, Wicked trail mix, nature lovers guidebook to trails, an Arkansas-shaped cutting board, and a very beautiful glass cross that if you don't get out of here very quickly, I'm taking it. Welcome. We're thrilled that you're here. Welcome to Arkansas and to Second. That's heavy. You can put it back down if you want to. Will you help me welcome Kevin? And I'm going to invite Kevin to stay up front today, so if you've yet to meet him and greet him, you can do so before you depart today. As you go from this place, go and love God with all that you are, all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And go and love your neighbor as yourself. Do it as if it's the most important thing in all the world, because it is. And it has everything to do with how well we do or do not listen. One of my favorite writers says, God is a speaking. God is word. God longs to communicate. Therefore, I will be a listening. Not just I will listen, but if God is a speaking, I will be a listening. Church family, go and love and be a listening. Who knows what you might hear? Peace be with you as you go. We'll see you next Sunday.